The Galactic Scouts were the elite explorers of the universe, known across galaxies for their unmatched skills and unshakable resolve. With their advanced technology, they ventured into the most dangerous corners of space without hesitation, fearless in the face of alien species, hostile environments, and unpredictable anomalies. It was said that nothing could challenge them, not a storm of asteroids, not the deadly creatures of untamed planets, and certainly not the most sophisticated threats the universe could throw at them. After all, the Scouts were more than explorers. They were conquerors of the unknown, always ahead of the curve, always prepared. When their latest mission led them to an uncharted planet on the edge of the galaxy, they anticipated little more than a routine scouting mission. A mostly unexplored world, this planet was thought to be barren, a dot on the star map with no life forms of note. The Scouts expected to collect data, map its surface, and move on. Simple. Predictable. They were, after all, prepared for anything. At first, their arrival was as uneventful as any other. They descended onto the planet's surface, a world thick with dense forests and towering mountains. The terrain was rugged but familiar, a blend of rocky plateaus and dark valleys that stretched into a dim horizon. It was the type of environment the Scouts had encountered countless times before. They set up camp, began their scans, and began moving through the foliage, eager to gather their data. But the Scouts quickly realized they weren't alone. Strange things began to happen. Their sensors, which should have been able to detect anything from a nearby predator to an atmospheric anomaly, started to fail. Communication with their ship flickered, and equipment malfunctioned in ways that didn't make sense. Small signs of activity appeared in the most unexpected places, sharp branches that seemed to have been snapped in deliberate patterns, piles of rocks arranged in ways that suggested an intelligent hand at work. The Scouts, confident as ever, laughed it off as the quirks of an alien planet, but deep down, a gnawing suspicion began to form. They were being watched. The first real shock came when one of the Scouts, a seasoned veteran named Zorn, fell into a hidden pit. It was a perfectly concealed trap, a deep, narrow hole in the ground, lined with sharp spikes at the bottom. Zorn's scream echoed through the dense trees as he dropped, and his comrades rushed to his aid. The pit had been covered with thin brush and camouflage, making it nearly invisible even to their enhanced vision. It was something far too sophisticated for any animal or natural formation. Someone, or something, was setting these traps. At first, the Scouts thought it was just an accident, a bizarre twist of fate. But then it happened again. Another member of the team, Daria, was ensnared by a series of vines that sprang up from the undergrowth, wrapping tightly around her legs and pulling her into the dirt. The vines were part of a complex mechanical system, not just some random growth. Whoever was behind this had a purpose. The realization set in. They were dealing with a master of traps. The Galactic Scouts, accustomed to facing all manner of threats, alien wildlife, hostile forces, and even entire civilizations, found themselves stumped by something completely new. They had no idea who or what could be setting these traps. They quickly began to follow the trail of snares, hoping to find answers. But the deeper they ventured into the planet's dense forests, the more dangerous and intricate the traps became. Each new snare seemed to outsmart the last, a never-ending series of challenges that forced them to think faster, act smarter, and adapt quickly. They soon realized that these were no simple traps. The designs were too precise, too well thought out. They weren't dealing with some primitive, instinct-driven creature but with a highly intelligent mind. Whoever had made these traps understood not only the physical mechanics of the planet's environment but also how to outwit even the most advanced technology. The traps seemed to anticipate the Scouts' every move, using their own strengths and weaknesses against them. Their gadgets, typically foolproof in any environment, failed one after another. Energy shields flickered and shut down, detection sensors misread the surroundings, and their comms were jammed. The universe, it seemed, had thrown a challenge at the Galactic Scouts they weren't prepared for. The scout team, once so confident, now found themselves second-guessing every step. The invisible enemy had them trapped in a mental game as much as a physical one. With each move, they began to feel more vulnerable, less in control. They weren't just navigating an unfamiliar planet, they were trapped in an intricately woven web of cunning and skill, designed to make them question their own abilities. It was during one of their strategic pauses, where they briefly regrouped to assess their options, that they first heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them. It wasn't the shuffling of an animal or the mechanical whir of some hidden trap, it was deliberate. Someone was walking in their direction, and they were no longer alone. The footsteps were slow and methodical, as if the individual didn't fear the scouts at all. Moments later, a figure emerged from the shadows, calm, unhurried, and undeniably human. He didn't carry the air of a soldier or a fighter. Instead, he exuded quiet confidence, a subtle assurance that he had been in control the entire time. This was no ordinary person. He was the mastermind behind the traps, the one who had watched the Galactic Scouts struggle, adapt, and fail. The scouts, now fully aware of the danger, raised their weapons, but the humans simply raised a hand, not in surrender, but in casual acknowledgement. He had no fear of the elite explorers, nor did he show any hint of aggression. He wasn't a conqueror. He wasn't interested in their advanced technology or their impressive skill set. He was there to prove something entirely different, that intelligence, creativity, and patience could outsmart even the most formidable opponents. And so, it was that the Galactic Scouts, the undisputed rulers of the universe, found themselves faced with a threat they had never expected. Not from a monstrous alien, not from a powerful enemy fleet, but from a single human, an individual who had mastered the art of traps to such a degree that even the might of the scouts couldn't help but be humbled. The game had changed. And for the first time in their storied careers, the scouts weren't sure they would come out on top. The planet the scouts landed on was at the far edge of a distant galaxy. Its surface was mostly uncharted, though initial scans suggested it was a barren world with little to offer in terms of resources or life. It had been catalogued as a low-priority target for exploration, its inhospitable terrain offering no obvious appeal to the usual explorers or colonizers. But for the Galactic Scouts, it was just another challenge, another blank canvas for them to survey and document. The mission was simple: gather data, survey the terrain, and move on. They touched down in a dense forest, the air thick with humidity and the oppressive heat of a planet untouched by civilization. The landscape was rugged, with towering cliffs and deep valleys that seemed to swallow the light. Though the place had the feel of isolation, the scouts were used to harsh environments. They set up camp, began their routine of mapping the planet's surface, and quickly moved on to the exploration phase. The planet seemed empty, lifeless. For a while, the scouts saw nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of life, no hidden structures, just the quiet hum of their equipment, and the distant call of birds or creatures they couldn't identify. It wasn't long, however, before something odd began to happen. Their scans, usually flawless, began to show inconsistencies. Their communication started to cut in and out, and devices malfunctioned without warning. Equipment that should have easily handled the dense atmosphere and rough terrain began to show signs of interference, a subtle but unmistakable indication that something was wrong. As they moved deeper into the planet's heart, they began noticing small, strange things: a rock that seemed out of place, a patch of earth that had been disturbed, and the unmistakable signs of intentional alterations to the environment. At first, they dismissed it as the random effects of a wild planet, but as time passed, they began to feel the pressure. They were being watched. Soon, their confidence started to wane. The feeling of being on edge intensified with every step they took, and their instincts began to shift from that of explorers to wary survivors. It wasn't just the environment that was strange, it was the unnerving presence of something intelligent, someone who had placed these objects with intent. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a crude setup, deadly pitfalls and precariously positioned rocks. But as the traps grew more complex, the scouts realized they were dealing with a mind that understood their every move. The planet wasn't empty at all. It was alive with traps. The first incident came swiftly. One of the scouts, caught off guard by a misstep, fell into a trap, a concealed pit lined with sharp spikes, hidden so skillfully that even their high-tech equipment failed to detect it. The moment the trap triggered, panic spread through the team. They rushed to free their comrade, but the damage was already done. This wasn't some wild animal's primitive snare. This was a trap designed to capture or kill with precision. Whoever was behind it wasn't just trying to scare them, they were trying to stop them, force them to play by a set of rules they didn't understand. The second trap was even more elaborate, a snare made of vines that seemed to come alive and twist around a scout's legs before pulling them into the ground. This time, there was no mistaking it. Someone was engineering these traps with a deep understanding of human and alien weaknesses. The vines weren't just natural, they were part of a larger, mechanical system, crafted to capture and restrain with purpose. Whoever was behind this didn't simply want to inconvenience the scouts, they wanted to make a statement. The stakes were higher now. Every corner held a new potential threat, and each step taken was more calculated than the last. The Galactic Scouts were no longer in control. The suspicion began to grow. How could one individual, presumably stranded here, have constructed such an intricate web of snares? There was no sign of any civilization on the planet, no buildings or shelters, yet the traps were far too sophisticated to be the work of animals or primitive life forms. Whoever was behind this had resources, knowledge, and patience, qualities that didn't align with the typical patterns of alien species or wildlife. It didn't make sense. The scouts were forced to reconsider their initial assessments. In an effort to find answers, they pressed on, tracking the source of these increasingly elaborate traps. But instead of gaining ground, they found themselves trapped in a mental game, one where every move was anticipated, every advantage nullified. Their advanced technology became useless. Their weapons, designed to deal with the deadliest threats the universe could throw at them, proved ineffective against the traps. It wasn't that they lacked the firepower or skill, they simply lacked the knowledge to face this kind of threat. They were being outwitted. Every time they thought they had a handle on the situation, the traps became more complex, the stakes higher. At this point, they had no choice but to assume that whoever was creating these traps was studying them, learning their strategies, and designing challenges specifically meant to test their intelligence and adaptability. The person behind the traps wasn't just trying to protect something, they were trying to outsmart them. The Galactic Scouts, used to outmaneuvering enemies with superior firepower and technology, were being bested by something far more insidious, a mind that understood how to exploit their every weakness. The realization was chilling. They had underestimated the dangers of this planet. And yet, despite all the signs, the scouts could not shake the feeling that they were still missing something vital. What was the purpose behind all this? Why go through such lengths to trap them, to force them into a game of survival? Was this some elaborate test? A challenge set by an unseen force to prove their worth? Or was there something more sinister at play? It was a question that gnawed at them as they continued to venture deeper into the planet, unable to shake the growing sense that they were playing into someone's hands. Whoever was behind this, they were more than just a simple threat. They were a mastermind, and the scouts had just stumbled into their domain. The human they encountered was unlike any of the Galactic Scouts had expected. They had assumed they would be dealing with an alien species or perhaps a remnant of some long-forgotten civilization. Instead, they found themselves face to face with a single individual, a human, unarmed and seemingly unconcerned by the powerful explorers standing before him. His calm demeanor only added to the unsettling nature of the encounter. While the scouts were armed with the most advanced technology in the galaxy, this human appeared completely at ease, almost indifferent to their presence. The human was not some ordinary survivor. He was the mind behind the traps, the architect of the elaborate snares that had kept the scouts on edge for days. When the scouts demanded answers, he didn't respond with fear or anger, but with an unsettling sense of detachment, as though the traps were no more than a game to him. He revealed that he had been stranded on the planet after a crash, left to fend for himself in an unforgiving environment. He had no intention of harming the scouts, at least not directly, but had found himself obsessed with the idea of survival, of testing his wits against the universe's most formidable adversaries. His background was simple enough. He had once been an engineer, someone with a sharp mind and a knack for problem solving. But his accident had changed everything. Stranded alone, he had no resources except his knowledge and the raw materials available on the planet. Over time, he had perfected his ability to set traps, first out of necessity, then out of obsession. His understanding of mechanics, combined with his isolation, had forced him to evolve into something else, a master trapper. He didn't see the Galactic Scouts as a threat, but as an ideal challenge, an opportunity to test the limits of his creations against the greatest minds in the universe. What made his traps so effective wasn't just the physical danger they posed, but the psychological edge they provided. They were not merely designed to kill or capture, they were crafted to exploit weaknesses, physical, mental, and technological. Every trap was a puzzle, a challenge that tested the scouts' intellect and forced them to question their assumptions. It wasn't enough for him to trap them physically, he wanted them to feel trapped in their own minds, to confront the limitations of their technology and their strategies. In a sense, the human's approach was deeply philosophical. He saw his traps as a way to prove that intelligence could outmatch even the most advanced technology. While the scouts relied on their gadgets and firepower, he relied on nothing but his wits, a few tools, and his knowledge of the environment. He had come to see the planet not as a place to survive, but as a living, breathing challenge. It wasn't about domination or power, it was about proving that human ingenuity, in its rawest form, could be just as powerful as any weapon or machine. As the conversation unfolded, the scouts began to understand the depth of his obsession. It wasn't that he had any particular vendetta against them. He wasn't trying to conquer the galaxy, nor was he interested in ruling over anyone. His sole purpose was to test his skills, to challenge himself in ways that no one else could. The traps were not just survival tools, they were his art, his passion. In a universe filled with vast powers and advanced technologies, he had found a way to carve out his own niche, one where he could be the most formidable force, not because of strength or resources, but because of his mind. This revelation forced the scouts to reassess everything they knew about the situation. They had initially believed they were dealing with a hostile force, perhaps an alien species bent on keeping them off the planet. They had relied on their training, their technology, and their experience to navigate the dangers they faced. But now they realized they were not facing a threat in the traditional sense. They were facing a person, one who had carefully constructed an environment where intellect, ingenuity, and patience were the only keys to survival. The Galactic Scouts, who prided themselves on their ability to adapt to any challenge, were now forced to confront an entirely new kind of adversary, one who didn't rely on brute force or advanced weapons, but on cunning, craft, and mastery of the mind. The human's motivations became clearer as the conversation continued. He wasn't interested in taking the scouts down out of malice or power. He had no desire to conquer the galaxy, nor did he have any particular interest in controlling anyone. His desire was simpler yet far more profound. He wanted recognition for the skills he had developed, for the ingenuity that had kept him alive in isolation for so long. In a way, the traps were his way of proving his worth, not to the scouts, but to the universe. He had built something remarkable in the silence of the planet's wilderness, and now he wanted the greatest minds in the galaxy to acknowledge it. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about validation. For the Galactic Scouts, the encounter was a wake-up call. They had come to the planet expecting to encounter something they could defeat with superior technology and firepower. They had underestimated the one thing that had allowed this human to survive, his mind. They had dismissed him as a primitive survivor, a mere obstacle in their path. But now they understood that he was far more dangerous than they had imagined. Not because he was more powerful, but because he was more intelligent. He had outsmarted them at every turn, forcing them to acknowledge that sometimes, raw intelligence and creativity could be a far greater weapon than any advanced technology. As they left the human behind, their minds were filled with new respect for his abilities. They had come to the planet expecting a simple mission, expecting to prove their superiority. But instead, they had encountered something that humbled them, something they had never expected. It wasn't just the traps that had challenged them. It was the realization that their own arrogance had led them to underestimate a human survivor on a remote planet. The experience had taught them a valuable lesson. that intelligence, when wielded with purpose and precision, could outmatch even the most sophisticated technology. And that lesson would stay with them for the rest of their journey, a constant reminder that in the universe, there was always something, or someone, greater than even the most powerful force. The Scouts were left reeling from their encounter with the human. Despite their impressive technological capabilities, they found themselves outwitted by a man who had mastered the art of survival through intellect alone. What had begun as a simple mission to survey an uncharted planet had morphed into an experience that exposed their vulnerability, their over-reliance on advanced technology, and their inability to adapt to a challenge that required more than just firepower or gadgetry. The human had crafted an environment where every step was a potential trap, every decision could lead to disaster. He had shown the Scouts that the greatest strength didn't lie in superior firepower or technology, but in the ability to think, adapt, and outmaneuver. The realization was unsettling. The Scouts had prided themselves on being prepared for anything, capable of handling the most dangerous threats the universe could throw at them. Yet they had underestimated the most basic principle of survival: intelligence, not brute force, often determines the outcome. In the days following the encounter, the Scouts were forced to reevaluate their strategies. They had been so certain of their superiority that they failed to account for the possibility that their adversary might have been playing a different game entirely. It was a humbling experience. They had been outsmarted not by an alien species or a hostile force, but by a human. The irony of it wasn't lost on them. The very thing they had relied on, technology, had failed them when confronted with an adversary who understood how to manipulate it. The human, for all his intelligence, had never intended to harm them in any direct way. He had no agenda beyond testing his abilities, proving that intellect could be just as powerful as any weapon. But for the Scouts, his traps were a wake-up call, a reminder that not every threat could be countered with a weapon or a gadget. The universe was vast, and it held countless mysteries that couldn't be solved with technology alone. The Scouts' initial response had been frustration. They were used to being in control, to facing challenges that could be overcome with skill and advanced technology. But as the days passed, they began to see the truth in the human's actions. He hadn't set the traps out of malice. He had set them to challenge them, to force them to think differently, to adapt to an environment that didn't follow the usual rules. He hadn't wanted to kill them, but rather to force them into a battle of wits, a battle that, until that moment, the Scouts had never had to fight. They had entered the planet with the assumption that they could control the situation, that their technology and training would be enough to overcome any obstacle. But in the end, it was the human's knowledge of the land, his resourcefulness, and his cunning that had made him the superior force. The realization that they had been bested in this way was difficult to swallow. It forced them to confront their own arrogance, their belief that they were invincible. They weren't just dealing with a survivor. They were dealing with a mind that had found a way to survive and thrive using nothing but intellect and ingenuity. The Scouts' respect for the human grew as they understood more about his motivations. He had crafted a series of challenges not to punish them but to test their abilities, to push them beyond their limits. His traps had been designed to expose their weaknesses, to show them that their greatest asset, technology, was not invincible. The human's purpose was clear: to prove that even the most advanced technology could be outsmarted, that the mind, when honed and focused, could become a more powerful weapon than any gadget or machine. As the Scouts prepared to leave the planet, they carried with them a new understanding of what it meant to be truly prepared. They had always thought of themselves as the masters of any situation, but they had learned that true mastery came from the ability to adapt, to think on one's feet, and to recognize when the rules of engagement had changed. The human had shown them that, no matter how advanced their technology was, there would always be challenges that could not be overcome through force alone. The mind, after all, was the ultimate weapon. The Scouts left the planet with a sense of humility they had never known before. The humans' traps had not only tested their skills but had exposed the limitations of their own thinking. They had been so focused on their technology and their superiority that they had failed to recognize the true nature of the challenge. They had underestimated a single individual who had crafted a system of traps that had brought them to their knees. And in doing so, they had learned a valuable lesson, that in the vastness of the universe, intelligence, not technology, would always be the greatest advantage. As they departed, they couldn't help but wonder how many other challenges lay out there. Challenges that couldn't be solved with gadgets, weapons, or brute force. The human had shown them that the universe was filled with unknowns, and the only way to truly conquer them was to think differently, to look beyond the obvious, and to recognize that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in what you can do, but in how you think. The Scouts had come to the planet expecting to conquer, but instead, they had been forced to confront something far more formidable. The mind of a single human who had proven that intellect and ingenuity could outmatch even the most advanced technology. The departure from the planet marked the end of the Scouts' mission, but it was far from the end of their journey. The lessons they learned would stay with them for the rest of their careers, reshaping the way they approached every challenge. They had set out to conquer the unknown, relying on their advanced technology and superior training, only to be humbled by the one thing they had underestimated: the power of a single human mind. The humans' traps had not only tested their physical abilities but had exposed the flaws in their reliance on technology as a solution to every problem. They had come to the planet expecting a simple mission, only to find that true survival wasn't about weapons or gadgets. It was about adaptability, creativity, and intelligence. The humans' presence on the planet, though it had initially seemed like a random encounter, had turned out to be a pivotal moment in the Scouts' understanding of what it meant to face a true adversary. They had assumed that advanced technology and firepower could solve any problem, that no challenge would be insurmountable. But in reality, the humans' traps had exposed the vulnerability of this belief. What the human lacked in resources, he made up for with sheer intellect. He had crafted an environment where every decision, every movement, had consequences. The human wasn't trying to defeat them with power. He was trying to prove that intellect could overcome even the most advanced technology. This realization was profound. The Scouts had always believed that they were prepared for anything, that no obstacle could stand in their way. But the humans' actions forced them to acknowledge the limits of their approach. They had underestimated the value of thinking beyond the obvious. They had relied too heavily on their technology to solve problems, forgetting that sometimes the best solution wasn't about having the most advanced tools, but about understanding how to use what you had in the most creative and effective way. The human had shown them that even the simplest tools, in the right hands, could be more powerful than the most sophisticated weapons. The impact of this experience went beyond the mission itself. It reshaped the Scouts' approach to every challenge they faced from that point forward. They began to recognize that there was no one-size-fits-all solution in the universe. Every challenge required a different mindset, a different way of thinking. The human had forced them to confront the idea that intelligence, resourcefulness, and adaptability were just as important, if not more important, than firepower or technology. They had learned that the ability to think critically, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to understand the true nature of a problem could make all the difference between success and failure. The Scouts' encounter with the human also prompted a deeper reflection on the nature of intelligence itself. They had assumed that intelligence was something that could be measured by technology, by gadgets, and by the ability to control the physical world. But the human had demonstrated a different kind of intelligence, one rooted in survival, creativity, and the ability to read and manipulate the environment. He had shown them that intelligence was not just about mastering complex systems or understanding vast amounts of data. It was about the ability to use whatever resources you had, no matter how limited, to solve problems and achieve your goals. This shift in perspective had a profound impact on the Scouts. It made them more mindful of their approach to new situations. They began to look at every challenge not just as a problem to be solved with technology, but as an opportunity to think differently, to use their creativity and resourcefulness. They no longer viewed the universe as a place where technology alone could provide all the answers. Instead, they understood that sometimes the best answers came from looking beyond the obvious, from using their minds to find new and unexpected solutions. As they moved on to the next phase of their mission, the Scouts carried with them the lessons they had learned on the planet. They had been tested in ways they had never anticipated, and they had emerged from the experience changed. Their confidence in technology had been shaken, but their respect for human ingenuity had been solidified. The human they had encountered wasn't just a survivor. He was a reminder that true strength came from the mind, the ability to think critically, adapt quickly, and solve problems creatively. In the vastness of the galaxy, the Scouts knew that they would face many more challenges. Some would be physical, some would be technological, and some would test their ability to think in ways they hadn't imagined. But they now understood that no challenge could be overcome by relying on technology alone. Every problem, every obstacle, required a unique approach, one that blended intelligence, creativity, and adaptability. The Scouts had come to realize that the greatest weapon in the universe wasn't firepower or gadgets. It was the ability to think and act with purpose, clarity, and ingenuity. Their encounter with the human had left them with a lasting impression that intelligence, when combined with purpose, could surpass even the most advanced technology. They had learned that the true measure of strength wasn't in what you had or what you could control, but in how you used what you had to navigate the challenges before you. This lesson would guide them through future missions and encounters, reminding them that in a universe full of complexities and unknowns, the mind was their most powerful tool. And that, perhaps, was the greatest takeaway from the planet where they had been bested by a human trapper.